Welcome back everyone to Blender to Unreal Engine 5, the complete beginner's guide, and this is where we left it off. Alright, so let's now come over to our array, and all you need to do is hover over this, and you press Ctrl A, and that will also apply it. So now if we press Tab, you can see we've got all of these meshes here. Now, before we carry on, the next thing we want to discuss is down at the bottom here, you can see that it says Blender 3.6.3, just actually what version of Blender is. I recommend that you always turn on how many polygons are in the scene, how much memory you're using, and things like that. And the reason is, if you're using a lower end machine, you might be struggling somewhere and you might not realize, but you might have hundreds of thousands of polygons in the scene. Now, Blender is pretty decent, you know, up to easily 150,000 polygons. The other thing is when you come to render it out though, the more polygons you have, the longer it's going to take to render out. So you need to take that on board as well. So for instance, if you've got, you know, a building which is not rendering out very fast, or, you know, it's really chugging along in the viewport, you need to see what the reason is behind that. So if I come up to edit, I'm going to go to, where is it? Preferences. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to interface, status bar. I'm going to turn on scene statistics, scene duration, system memory, video memory. Turn them all on, and there we go. Now we've got a lot of information here. So we've got how many vertices are in the scene. Now the main thing why this is so high, yours will also be high, is because this is costing a lot at the moment. If I hide him out the way, you'll see now that it goes down to this, which is much less than what we had. So let's just unhide him with Alt H. Don't worry too much about this. Now the other thing you can see is that it tells you how many faces, how many triangles, how much memory you're actually using. This is the main one. When this you know, memory gets to like 2-3 gigabytes, something like that, you're probably going to have a hard time actually rendering anything out. So just, you know, there is that to take on board. The other thing that's really important is it tells you how many objects are in the space, because sometimes when you're doing a large render, you'll have hundreds and hundreds of objects, and it's better to render them out as layers. You know, break them into 100 objects per layer or something like that, and then layer them up. This is what, you know, studios do to actually, you know, render out films. You know, like the Pixar films, for instance. They don't just render like, you know, all the objects out at the same time. They render them out in layers. So this is why we use this. All right, so now what we want to do is we actually want to go back to modeling, because we're not actually going to be working with our UVs for a bit. And then what I want to do is now I want to alter these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some at random. So if I come in and I'll grab L. So make sure you're pressing L. Just grab some at random. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink these in. So S and Y, shrink them in. Now you'll notice at the moment it's trying to move them all to the middle, and we don't want that. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that instead of being on medium point, which is this point right in the center, we want it to be on individual origins, which means that it's going to shrink them in based on each of these planks. So if I now press S and Y, you can see that they get shrunk in based on each of those. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide those ones out of the way. I'm going to grab the next ones. So I'm just going to grab a few of these. I'm going to press S and Y, and we're going to go the other way. Like so. I'm going to hide these out of the way, and then I'm going to grab the next one. So L, L, and L. And what I'm going to do is press S and Y. Shrink these in pretty small, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Alt and H, and you'll end up with a little bit of a mess like this. Now what we want to do is you want to come to move each of these in or out. So what do I mean by that? So again, I'm going to come to, let's say, this one, just pick any at random. And then what you're going to do is press Shift Spacebar, bring your move tool in. I'm going to move them out very, very slightly, like so. Hide them out the way. And then the next one, I'm going to grab a few of these, like so. Make sure you're on Edge Select when you grab them, like so. And I'm going to pull these back very, very slightly, like so. And then I'm going to grab some more, and I'm just going to do exactly the same thing with these. I'm going to pull them out a little bit, but I don't want to be influenced by the others that I was doing. So that's why I actually did them separate, like so. All right, let's press Tab, and now you can see we've got this to work with. You can see that we do have some problems where ones are touching and things like that. And this is why we made more of them, because now what we just need to do is if we press Tab, Alt H, bring everything back. what I'm going to do now is put them all together. So if I press L, press 3, so I'm looking at the side view. What I can do now is I can just pull them together like so. And bear in mind, we're not going to have to do this again because we're going to be using this all around the actual cabin. So don't worry, you're not going to have to do this every single time. It's just getting them all set up in a way that looks really nice and you're actually happy with. Now, bearing in mind, if you see like 2 together, you know, make sure that everything is looking different. We'll have a good look at that actually when we've brought them all together. But you can see already, we haven't even finished yet. We're starting to get a lot of variation. So once we actually finish this, you'll see, oh wow, that was actually really worth doing. So let's come into this one, not this one here. Just spend a little bit of time getting these right, because we know, as I said, it's going to look really nice for one thing, and we're going to use this as a base for most of the other parts. And you can actually take this a step further as well. So there's 2 stages to taking it further. The first stage I'm going to show you is where you're randomizing all of the edges. And then the second stage is actually taking it through to ZBrush or something like that. And actually making all the edges really worn and things. And that's what AAA games really do. All right, so we've got this, and you can see that's looking pretty nice already. Now, what I want to do is I just want to make sure that they're not too thick or anything like that. And I also want to fit them into here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press 3. And then I'm going to press Ctrl-A, all transforms, right-click, set origin geometry. And then S and Y, and just pull them in a little bit. I'm going to put my X-ray on so I can see whereabouts it is. Press Shift Spacebar, go to Move. And let's pull them in. S and Y. And I just want to make sure that they line up really nicely against here. They don't have to be perfectly on there. Just a little bit in, because we're going to put some blocks in there anyway. Some wooden blocks going up. All right. Let's take off X-ray. Double tap the A just to deselect everything. And let's just bring them into place where they're going to go. So we can see now, if I put those there, they're looking pretty nice already. All right, so one thing I'm not happy about is, I think at the moment that, you know, these are a little bit too far out. They shouldn't be too far out. As you can see, we've got some that aren't and some that are way far out, and we don't really want that. So I'm going to come in, and as I say, just spend the time making sure that this is really nice. I'm going to pull those out a little bit. So now you can see they're just slightly over, and they're slightly under. And as you can see now, that looks much better. All right, so the next thing we want to do, we want to add in a modifier. And we want to add in a modifier because we want to bevel off the edges of here. Because the thing is about wood, it's not going to be perfectly like a razor blade on the edges of it. We really need to make sure that it's beveled off just a slight bit, you know, so it looks like it's got a slight bit of weathering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Ctrl-A, all transforms, right-click, set origin geometry, add in a modifier, bring in a bevel. Now you'll notice that looks ridiculous, what it's like at the moment. But if we come over and turn the amount down to 0 and get it back to where it was, and then turn this up just 1, and you'll see now that is looking much nicer. Now for me, I still feel that is too high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm going to type my own figure in. So 0.003, enter, and now you can see they are looking much better. Now I'm just looking around, just making sure that, yes. So the one thing I'm missing here, because I went in modeling, so I think when you start off and you first open up Blender, you can see cavity is on here. So if I go over here, cavity's on. If I come to modeling though, cavity's not on. So let's put cavities on. Like so, let's press tab, and now you can see they're looking much better. All right, so the one thing I'm looking at now is I want to actually make them now a bit more non-uniform. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to actually press tab A to grab them all. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to mesh, come down to where it says transform, come down to where it says randomize, click that on, and we'll end up with an absolute mess. But don't worry, because down here on the left hand side, we can actually click this open. and can actually bring this down. If I set this on 0 to start with, because it does go either way, so it can go this way or this way. If I set this though down to 0 and then put it up 1, like so, you can see now they are looking much, much nicer. The last thing you want to do is, you can see you've got all of these blocky parts at the moment. What you want to do now is right click and shade auto smooth. Now, for those of you who are using Blender 2.8, you're going to have to right click shade smooth. You're then going to go down to the little triangle. You're going to open up your normals and you want to just set this on auto smooth and leave it at 30 degrees. Now we can see this is what we've ended up with. Now, the one thing I think that I need to just do before carrying on the next lesson is just move these up a little bit closer to each side, just so they look a little bit more, you know, there's not as massive a gap in there as this, because again, it wouldn't really be like this. They'd be a little bit closer together. At the moment, the wind would really howl through there and our guy would probably freeze to death. All right, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.